Hello, I'm Kathy English, curator of Revelstoke Museum and Archives, and we're presenting Brown Bag History for November 24th, 2021 on the topic of hot springs. As we begin, we acknowledge the land, traditions, and culture of four nations: the Secwepemc, the Ktunaxa, the Sinixt, and the Okanagan Nation Alliance, the Silks. We acknowledge our use and inhabitation of this land, sacred to these four nations. So we're talking about hot springs today, and I'm going to focus on just three: Albert Canyon Hot Springs, Halcyon, and St. Leon. We'll start in Albert Canyon. We don't have a lot of information on that one, but it was Albert Canyon itself is 33 kilometers east of Revelstoke, and there was a village there that sprung up during railway construction in 1885. There's also a gorge there with used to have passenger trains visiting, and a lookout there into the gorge, and the hot springs. It's believed that railway employees dug or blasted a pit at the hot springs and lined it with heavy timbers. It was just an open air hot tub used by visitors and residents for many years. An article in the Kootenai Star, published at Revelstoke on September 13th, 1890, talked about Albert Canyon as having a comfortable and hospitable hotel kept by A.J. Strand and Company. And he said, a few hundred feet back from the mountain is a warm spring of moderate temperature, which has been fitted up for bathing. The path leading to it winding across a natural meadow, then among a growth of ferns, and through a forest of large firs and cedars. There was also a note in the 1896 newspaper in July that a note under Albert Canyon News that a man named John Skogstrom had opened up his hotel at Albert Canyon Station under the name of the Springs Hotel. And so he was actually advertising the hot springs as one of the attractions in the area. Although we're not sure whether he actually had piped water from the springs or not. We're not sure sort of what he did in terms of developing them. We have in the museum, we actually have a guest register from the Springs Hotel. John Skogstrom was one of many Swedes who had come to Revelstoke in 1885 with railway construction. He actually worked on the first railway bridge over the Columbia at Revelstoke. He was following railway construction across the country, often working as a camp cook. And then he lived in Albert Canyon for the rest of his life and died there at the age of 93 in 1930. There's a funny little newspaper, more like just a copied sheet, that was produced by a guy named Fred Forrest, who was a rather eccentric resident of Albert Canyon. And he had this little newspaper that he called the Albert Canyon Recorder. And it was tidbits of news, but a lot of jokes and making things up. So I suspect this comes under the category of making things up. But he said that in March 19th, 1898, pipes are in the course of being laid from the hot springs to the Springs Hotel for the purpose of washing the barroom floor. Most of the photographs we have from the Albert Canyon Hot Springs came from a family named the Shoots, who lived in Albert Canyon from 1956 to 1958. And one of the boys in the family said, for a school outing, the teacher would take us up to the hot springs for the afternoon. In addition to the school outing, our parents would take us up there for family picnics. I can clearly recall the smell of the 26-degree centigrade mineral water, the smell of the trees, the slimy wooden boards holding the water in, the gravel bottom, and best of all, the frogs and tadpoles swimming around. And Canyon Hot Springs Resort was developed in the 1960s after completion of the Trans-Canada Highway. Water was piped in from the original springs. We're going to move down to Halcyon Hot Springs. which is south of the Galena Bay Ferry. And there is a current Halcyon Hot Springs operating there now. The Snipes people knew the hot springs and visited them during their seasonal rounds. The pools the water was extremely hot and had a high lithium content. It gave a strange blue shade to the water. It was really known for its curative powers. So the Snipes had dug deep depressions near the springs for soaking. We have a memoir in the museum by a man named Edward Picard, who came out here from Quebec in the 1880s, and he was doing prospecting in the area. They were prospecting around the Arrow Lakes in the spring of 1887. He said, we rode down to what is now the St. Leon Hot Springs. We found the water too high in this creek for us to do any prospecting on it, so they rode further up the lake. He said, my partner went to see if he could get a grouse, although they referred to it as a chicken. He soon returned with the news that he had found a hot spring. After having our dinner of the usual pork and beans, for Joe did not get a chicken, we climbed up the side of the hill only a short distance and came upon a well-beaten deer trail. By following this for a short distance, we arrived at what is now the great Halcyon Hot Springs. Looking around, we found two names carved in a good-sized fir tree standing beside the spring. One name was John Reynolds. It was possible that those were people who had been here either during the fur trade or the gold rush north of Revelstoke in the 1860s. He said, after putting a few logs across to make a dam, we had several hot baths during the 2 days we stopped there. These hot springs had absolutely no value at that time. They were too far from anywhere, and there was no means of transportation. They were not staked until some 2 years later by Bob Sanderson. Robert Sanderson was born in Ontario in 1849. He studied mechanical engineering as well as medicine. He was supervising the bridge construction through the mountains during CPR construction, concluding with the bridge across the Columbia River at Revelstoke. He built the catamaran Dispatch for use on the Arrow Lakes. He started the Columbia and Kootenay Navigation Company in 1890 with William Cowan and Fred Hume. He purchased about 400 acres around the springs in 1890. He built a small plunge pool inside a small building. He had hot water fed by means of a wooden pipe from the outflow to the site. He built the first hotel at the site in 1894, managed by Bruce Craddock and Mrs. Langrel, who's the landlady. They had a party and dance to open the hotel. The newspaper said there was an excellent band composed of 4 pieces, and dancing was the favorite pastime indulged in by most of the guests. There being something like 30 couples on the floor. They had visitors from Nakusp, Nelson, and Revelstoke for the opening of the hotel. And testimonials of the recuperative properties of the mineral water brought patrons from throughout the region. It was advertised as a health sanitarium. In 1897, Dr. Brett, who was well known in Banff at the time, took over the hotel and sanitarium from Sanderson and his partner, Nathan Lay. He paid just over $20,000 for the property and the buildings. He had a new hotel built at Halcyon by W. Farr, who had worked on the CPR hotel at Revelstoke above the station. There was a note in the Revelstoke Herald of August 1898. It said, in all BC, a more healthful and suitable place to spend a few days with one's family or otherwise away from business worries or monotony of daily toil could not be found than at the Halcyon Hot Springs. Leaving Revelstoke about 8 a.m. by train for Arrowhead, connection is made at 9:30 a.m. with the magnificent steamers now plying on the Arrow Lakes. After half an hour's sailing, which seems a very short time under such circumstances, the most famous Halcyon Hot Springs and sanitarium are reached. The newspaper went on to say that there was a large staff of clerks and porters and an experienced man to look after the men's bathrooms and a first-class nurse to attend the ladies and the sick. There was a saloon built about 100 feet from the main building. The article went on to say the dining rooms are neat, clean, and attractive, while a decided improvement has been made in the bill of fare. The rates have been raised from $2 to $2.50 a day, and bath tickets remain at $5 for $1. The article went on to say people from all portions of the globe were constantly coming and going to this resort. The numbers of crutches left behind goes to demonstrate the many who have been cured of rheumatism through bathing in this hot mineral water. A large bottling plant is being installed on the grounds, and soon aerated Halcyon water will be in command the world over. We have this bottle from Halcyon Hot Springs in our collection, and it's labeled as being Lithia water. It was actually bottled at the Revelstoke Wine and Spirit Company in Revelstoke, which was located about where the CPR or the RCMP station is now. In their bottling works, they also produced the sarsaparilla with lithia in it. It's sparkling and delicious. Halcyon Lithia, bottled at Halcyon Hot Springs. In the Trail Creek News of June 24th, 1899, it mentioned that a Mr. Husband had taken charge and the grounds had been graded, seeded, and beautified. And the interior of each of the building had been renovated, painted, and papered. At that time, there was accommodation for 100 guests, including family cottages. Each room was carpeted and furnished with beautiful wood furnishings. The manager planned to install an electric plant to supply 300 lights. It was to be run by a water wheel, supplied by the water gushing down the hill above the hotel. They had plunge baths built of stone and cement for ladies and gentlemen, as well as private baths in the cottages and the hotel. They had steam and sweat rooms available with skilled attendants. The water was also always between 105 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. As well as lithia, it contained silica and alkaline salt. During the years of World War I, there was not as much traffic at the sanitarium, but workers from the Trail smelter were sent to Halcyon by the Workmen's Compensation Board to sweat the lead from their bodies. Trail was a lead smelter at the time, and there really weren't a lot of health protections there for the men working there. So they would give them consecutive baths and wrap them in sheets and blankets to cause severe sweating, and said that if a nurse held the linen up to the sunlight, they could actually see the lead in the linens. There was a little Halcyon Hot Springs Courier paper published in 1923 advertising the site. It included an analysis of the water and several testimonials. Here's one from W.W. Corrigan of Headley, BC, in June of 1914. I was helped by friends onto the railway cars at Castlegar and carried by steamer to Halcyon, then carried to the sanitarium. Today, after 1 week's bath, sciatica has disappeared, and I am in complete possession of health. W.J. Verge of Victoria wrote in September of 1920, I arrived at Halcyon 2 weeks ago, utterly prostrated by a rheumatic attack, torturing hands, arms, and feet. In 12 days, I was able to utilize all my physical energies and in gratitude, contribute this testimonial. In 1924, Halcyon Hot Springs was purchased by Frederick William Elias Burnham. As a very interesting character. He was born in Ontario in 1872 and graduated as a doctor in Manitoba in 1894. During the First World War, he served as a Surgeon General in the Balkans. And after the war, he was awarded the title, the rank of Brigadier General. He was known as a humanitarian and doctor in the Balkans, particularly Montenegro, Macedonia, and Serbia. In 1918, he organized a Canadian War Hospital Fund, which was incorporated under the name of the White Cross of Canada to furnish medical supplies to Montenegro, Serbia, and Macedonia. The White Cross was called the White Cross of St. John, which is an ancient society really going back to the days of the Crusades. It included the St. John ambulance. which did a lot of training in first aid and medical care. He ran Halcyon under the auspices of the White Cross. You can see in his little brochures, it has the what's known as the Maltese Cross, and it said the White Cross Grand Priory Order. A couple of little brochures that were advertising the Halcyon. He introduced a strict health regimen while he was there. He closed down the bar and did not allow alcohol or smoking on the premises. The lights went out precisely at 10 p.m. At the evening meals, he came down to the dining room in full military dress, with the Allied flags flying in the room. After dinner, he gave lectures on art and literature. He would meet the SS Minto steamboat at the dock, wearing his Montenegrin military uniform, complete with medals, and his former aide from Montenegro, V. Koperevica, was standing at attention behind him. Behind them, the waitresses were all lined up in their blue uniforms. As the passengers embarked, a record player with speakers in the trees played O Canada, so very formal. But Burnham had a habit of taking a daily run through the grounds, rain or shine, in the nude. So visitors were told about that and encouraged to not look out the windows early in the morning. He kept the rates at $4 per day for all the time that he ran the hotel. His wife, Etta Bartle Burnham, was a Canadian nurse, and he'd met her overseas. She died at Halcyon on July 23rd, 1945, at the age of 68. After her death, General Burnham built a shrine in her memory on a wooded slope overlooking the lake near the hotel. A copper plaque read, "To Anna Burnham, 1945, my dear old sweetheart and companion of life's joys and adventures." And there's a picture of the interior, part of the interior of the shrine. And she was buried near the shrine. There was a small cemetery there with a few people who had passed away there. In March of 1949, Halcyon and St. Leon were cut off from outside travel from the SS Minto due to the ice conditions on the lake, so they weren't able to get supplies in. General Burnham sent a telegram to the Premier of BC, Premier Johnson at Victoria, stating that the patients and the staff at Halcyon had only 48 hours of food left and that the animal fodder was low. The Canadian Red Cross assembled food packages, and the RCAF sent a search and rescue plane piloted by veteran rescue flyer Flight Lieutenant Cecil Hosiason, Vancouver. He made 17 low-level runs over the two communities, Halcyon and St. Leon, to drop 900 pounds of hay and 2,100 pounds of foodstuffs. It was a large plane. He had 10 RCAF personnel on board, and along with a couple of newspaper reporters. The Mercy flight just took them 4.5 hours to complete the round trip from Vancouver. On February 19th, 1955, fire broke out at Halcyon Hot Springs, destroying the hotel. General Burnham lost his life in that fire. It was believed that he was trying to light the kitchen range at the time. When the fuel oil ignited, a young man named Tom Yumoto, who's the cook, was unable to rescue Burnham by himself. There was only one other person in the building at the time, a young woman. By the time they got back, they were unable to get through the flames to get to Burnham. He was 85 years old at the time and was buried at Halcyon. The shrine and surrounding buildings were not burned. The shrine is still in place today. In his will, he left his estate to the nation of Yugoslavia, but the will was overturned and his estate went to two nephews instead. After the raising of the Arrow Lakes Reservoir in the late 1960s, all that remained were the little shrine chapel and the graves beside it. The current Halcyon Hot Springs was begun in 1998 and has been expanded over the years and is currently open for visitors. We're going to move down now to farther down the lake to St. Leon Hot Springs. This is Michael Grady, who I've also seen as Michael O'Grady, but all the official records have his name as Grady. He came out from Peterborough, Ontario in 1892 and was prospecting in the area when he came across the hot springs. An anecdotal story says that he called them the Springs of St. Leon after the Fountain of Youth that was being trying to be found by the explorer Ponce de Leon in what is now Florida. Some accounts say that he staked a mining claim that he sold for $35,000, and that allowed him to start building his hotel in 1902. That could be true, but newspaper accounts from 1897 and 1898 indicate that there was a dispute over ownership of the land between Grady and William M. Brown, who was the owner of the Columbia House Hotel in Revelstoke, one of the very first hotels on Front Street. According to the Revelstoke Herald of October 15th, 1898, an agreement was made giving Brown full ownership of the property and water rights. The article indicated that he planned to build a 3-story hotel on the property. The site was described in that newspaper in 1898. The mouth of this valley is a wide flat on which the principal buildings of the proposed summer resort will be erected. Back of the valley rise the hills, on one of which, at a distance of about 1.5 miles from the lake, are located the springs of mineral water, from which the place derives its chief celebrity. There are several of these, one gushing out from its hidden home in the granite at a temperature of 120 degrees. While quite close to this, another bubbles out of the rock cold and clear, making a most delicious and invigorating drink. Arrangements are completed to commence the work of piping down the water to the lakefront within 30 days. And even then, before there were any buildings on the property, people were going down as a holiday spot. At some point, I haven't been able to find out yet, but at some point, Grady regained control of the property because it was Grady who opened the first hotel on February 18th, 1902. He had chartered a special train from Revelstoke to Arrowhead for those wanting to attend the opening dance. Grady ran the hotel for several years. He obtained a liquor license, and money from the bar sales kept the operation running. One year he forgot to renew the license, and the bar was forced to shut down, severely hurting his revenues. Because the springs were 1.5 miles behind the hotel, not everybody wanted to go back that far to the springs. They wanted to have access to the water at the hotel. So he was piping the water to the hotel, but over that distance, it was cooling before it reached the hotel. So he was forced to reheat it, again, cutting into his revenues. As I say, lots of locals went down to St. Leon. On August 25th, 1909, the local Retail Merchant Society sponsored an excursion to St. Leon. They closed most of the stores in town to allow anybody who wanted to go down on the boat. I think the registered number of passengers for the boat was about 12. You can see there are several more than that on the boat at the time. By 1934, Grace Rickson of Revelstoke owned St. Leon. She also owned the Revelstoke Hotel, formerly the Selkirk, on First Street in Orton. It's now part of the Regent Hotel. She allowed Mike Grady to continue to live there for several years. He was finally sent to a home in Kamloops, where he died in October of 1944 at the age of 89. Was seen accounts saying that he made friends with animals, and that quite often he could be seen walking with 2 dogs and a deer or 2 down to the lake shore. This photograph was taken in around 1920 by Emma Roberts, who had gone down to St. Leon. So we're assuming that's one of Grady's tame deer. Said that he'd feed porcupines. There was often a bird, like even fishhawks, perching on his shoulder and feeding from his hand. One account says that he caught a grizzly bear cub and kept it until it got too big. He tried to donate it to a zoo, but the authorities heard about it, and the police officer came to arrest him for keeping a wild animal in captivity. They managed to distract the officer for a while he went back and opened the cage and let the bear out. I think it came to a bad end eventually because it was so tame it wouldn't leave and was scaring guests around the hotel. So several Revelstoke families had holiday cabins near St. Leon for years. In August of 1945, Grace Rickson sold St. Leon Hot Springs to Mr. and Mrs. A.E. or Ed Gates of Delaware. They called the resort the Gates of St. Leon. At the Revelstoke Review of October 31st, 1968, announced that the contents of the hotel were to be auctioned off at the cusp by the proprietor, Ed Gates, as the hotel site would be flooded due to the construction of the Hugh Keenley Side Dam at Castlegar. The Gates had been running the hotel for 23 years at that time. But just 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after the scheduled auction, the hotel burned down. The cause of the fire was never determined. Gates had been negotiating with BC Hydro for removal of the building to higher ground. And so the St. Leon was gone. The lower part of the land, of course, is now part of the Arrow Lakes Reservoir behind the Hugh Keenley Side Dam. The lands in that area are currently privately held, and there's no public access into St. Leon. Of course, there is also the Nacuspot Springs, which are open to the public. And there is a small hot springs at Halfway, which is on Halfway Creek between Galena Bay and the Cusp. And it's currently maintained by BC Parks. It's accessible partway by vehicle on logging road. Some, depending on the road conditions and the vehicle, you can get in quite close to the springs. Other times, if the roads aren't good or you don't have a really good vehicle, you're looking at a fair hike into it. But it is maintained now by BC Parks. So thank you for joining us for today's talk. Just a reminder, we've got this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we have our Moonlight Madness sale on. And we also have an online store now, which you can access at, on our website, revelstokemuseum.ca. And the next Brown Bag History is on Wednesday, December 8th, on the Farwell Police War, which it's always a fun story to tell. So thanks for joining us today.